Uncle Iqbal, are you there by any chance? Uncle Iqbal, are you there by any chance? Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. We welcome you tonight the program of the Shahadat of our 10th Imam, Imam Ali Naqi al-Hadi alayhi salam. Inshallah, we will begin our program here shortly. We will start with the recitation of the Holy Quran. And after the recitation of the Holy Quran by our young brother Ayan Ali, we will then have the Dua Tawassul. After the Dua Tawassul by Brother Abbas Ali Fazal, we will then begin the Wafat program with Marcia and Majlis, and then end with the Matam, inshallah, at the end of the program. So with that, I will... I
was just trying to see what he was going to say.
I will invite, let's see, Ayan, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Let me put you on here. Okay, Ayan, when you are ready, Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر نفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. Now I'm going to do the translation, which is in the name.
Oh, somehow you got muted, Ayan. Can you do the translation again? You got muted. Can you unmute? Okay, now do the translation again.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, say I seek refuge with the Lord of Dawn from the mischief of darkness as it overspreads, from the mischiefs of those who practice secret arts, and from the mischiefs of those the envious one has practices envy.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Good job, Ayan, mashallah. Really good job. Inshallah, we'll have you do it again and all the time, inshallah. Keep practicing your Quran and mashallah, keep doing it again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to proceed with the Dua Tawassul. And Abbas Ali, if you can give me 1 quick second so I can share this screen. Let's see. Let's see. Abbas Ali, whenever you're ready, Bismillah, and I will change the screen for you, inshallah.
Inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma inni as'aluka wa tawajjahu ilayk min nabiyyika nabiyyir rahmah Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa alihi يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباكر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها القاذم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التكي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وسي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله حاجة. يا ساداتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وأدتي ليوم فخري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا ساداتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله ظالمهم من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. سورة المباركة الفاتحة. Uncle Iqbal, whenever you're ready. Bismillah. Bismillah, Uncle Iqbal.
दरबारे यजीदी में भला कैसे मैं जाऊं, दरबारे यजीदी में भला कैसे मैं जाऊं, ये चाक भी रहमान, ये चाक भी रहमान हयाती है बाबा। जब याद सकीना को तेरी आती है बाबा, कानों से टपकता है लहू, शानों पे देखो, कानों से टपकता है लहू, शानों पे देखो, जालिम की अज़ियत, जालिम की अज़ियत मुझे तड़पाती है बाबा। जब याद सकीना को तेरी आती है बाबा। जलते हुए खैमों के नजारे है नजर में, जलते हुए खैमों के नजारे है नजर में। ये बात ख्यालों से, ये बात ख्यालों से कहा जाती है बाबा। जब याद सकीना को तेरी आती है बाबा, मर जाऊंगी प्यासी न कभी, मांगूंगी पानी, मर जाऊंगी प्यासी न कभी, मांगूंगी पानी। असगर की मुझे प्यार, असगर की मुझे प्यार, जो याद आती है बाबा। जब याद सकीना को तेरी आती है बाबा, जब तक तेरे सीने से न लग जाए सकीना, जब तक तेरे सीने से न लग जाए सकीना, जिंदा में उसे नहीं, जिंदा में उसे नहीं कहाँ आती है बाबा। जब याद सकीना को तेरी आती है बाबा, सर जिंदगी दीवारों से टकराती है बाबा। चलो नबी।
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسن يا عباد. سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير، والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن عنده علم من الكتاب صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters, youngsters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, youngsters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, what is the role of a guide? We're told with respect to the moments of the passing of the 9th Holy Imam, prior to the 10th Holy Imam's passing, the 10th Imam, who we are here to commemorate tonight, is in Medina, whereas his father is abroad. And when his father is there, he comes to his grandmother and he says to his grandmother at that moment in time in Medina that my blessed father has left this world and departed from this world. At that point in time, his grandmother, who he's speaking to, as you can imagine, to lose a son who's approximately 25 years, it would be quite difficult. And she says, my son, how do you know? And at that point in time, he responds and says, because that angel which inspires and tells us about imamat, which conveys the nur of the imamat, has now informed me that that light is now with me. This was at the young age, this Imam took on this mantle of imamat, that is Imam al-Hadi, who you and I are here to commemorate tonight. In remembering and recollecting the life of Imam al-Hadi, there are a few things that we need to look at in order to understand the gravity of this individual and this personality. Number one, why is it that we commemorate the Imams? Why do we have these commemorations of wiladat and shahadat? Is it just a custom or a culture, or is there a message behind this and a meaning behind this? Number one. Number two, what is its connection to the Quran and that of spirituality? Does it have any connection or not? Or is it something that we've created on our own? Number three, what is it that this Imam teaches us about wisdom, about community development, about actually doing something in society that is for its time as well as for beyond? As in, what did the Imam tell us about how we are supposed to keep up with the times, whatever the era and time may be? And finally, I want to look at what lessons does this Imam teach us about the future of Shiaism based on what he was doing at that time and the groundwork that he was laying at that time. And finally, inshallah, we will commemorate the tragedy and the musibah of this Imam and give the condolences to the Imam of our time on the passing of his blessed grandfather. This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are, here in Florida or across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. At the first level, when it comes to understanding the Quran, one layer is that layer which gives us laws and elements of this nature. Now, these are a means perhaps to an end, but they are, according to our ulama, they are not the end in and of itself. That is, that these laws that are there in the Quran are very important for individual, family, community, and societal harmony. But if the end-all, be-all of the Quran is simply this, that would not be the full meaning. One would miss the entirety of the Quran in much deeper meaning. Now, in this discussion, I should mention to you that there is a broad discussion in academia as well as in the Hausa about the Islamic spiritual tradition, and there have been different views on it of how to obtain it. And there are some that say, for example, terms like mysticism or irfan, especially those who come from an Arab background or Arab school of thought, they're not the most keen on it historically. And then there's others who are from typically a Persian background and thereafter who are often much more open to it. I'm talking about from a scholarship perspective. Things that emerged from the Persian area as well as from the Arabian belt. Differences emerged. So you'll find the critics of what I'm about to say, and you'll also find the supporters of what I'm about to say. That is, in Islam, there is something called Sharia, which is the laws and the legislation. And then there's something called Tariqah, that is a path, a way. And then there's finally Haqiqah, that is the reality. This is within the realm of Irfan. What is Irfan really in its truest sense? Akhlaq and Irfan have parallels, but they're not entirely the same. I invite you to read the book on Irfan by Shaheed al-Mutahhari in his great work on this introduction, where he's tried to lay the framework. And he says, Akhlaq and Irfan have a lot of parallels, but there's differences also. For example, he says akhlaq can be secular. Akhlaq does not necessarily have to have Islam or not. Akhlaq can just be, non-religious. It doesn't have to be religious. Whereas Irfan has to be within the framework of God and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But on this way, Sharia, if you go to the root word of Sharia, it's interesting to find, Sharia's root word is actually a tributary. A small body, a small thin body of water that connects to a much larger body of water. And if you actually think about that, the Sharia is just an avenue that is leading us to something much greater. So that's why when we end up focusing only on the jurisprudence and only on that, we miss the whole picture. Of course, the jurisprudence is the entryway and the door in. There's nothing without it. But there's a whole world beyond that we need to consider. And that's where the tariqah and haqiqah comes in, number one. Number two, when it comes to spirituality in Islam, many people are trying to figure out, how do I get this spirituality? How do I get this? And Mutahhari explains this, that irfan has two dimensions. One is practical irfan, one is theoretical irfan, as you may have heard before. This idea of that which is applicable and actionable in terms of the actions that one does, and then there's one that is theoretical. The one that is actually practical, some people have objected on this, and some people have objected even on other parts of where the notion of theoretical comes from. But those who are supporters say this comes straight from the Ahlul Bayt and this straight comes from the beginning of Islam. Others say no, there are other beliefs. Now Mutahhari says, look, just because there may have been some people who are on this path who may have made some mistakes and maybe weren't right, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is what Europe did with religion. Europe said, look, we've had the Protestant Catholic War, we've had the 30-year war, we've had this war in religion, that war in religion, all of them caused by religion, so let's get rid of religion, it'll solve our problem. They threw the baby out with the bathwater. He says, one should not do this, to be intellectually honest, that just because some people made one mistake here and then you toss out all of the benefit that may be here. You have to keep in mind that many of these people were deeply sincere people who are on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within Islam. Now, again, there are different views on this. Why did I tell you all of this? Because when it comes to Islamic spirituality, one thing that everyone accepts is that you need, in order to get to the higher stations of spirituality, you need a guide. You need a Hadi. You need someone to guide you on that path. The example from the Quran, according to the ulama, is the story of Musa and Khidr. Musa is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of a very high station. And yet Allah says to Musa, go find someone who is more knowledgeable. And he sends him to find Khidr. Khidr in this story was the guide of Musa on this path, on this spiritual journey. Therefore, we also need guides. But is the guide someone who we start focusing solely on? No. When we come to this, our Imams, the 14 infallibles and the Ma'sumin, when we commemorate their wiladah, their shahadat and these things, it's to remind us who our guides are. So we don't fall prey to other guides around the world and we see someone doing something like this and someone doing something like that and we say, oh, that's my guide. Allah is telling us these are your guides. If you want to aspire to a worldly role model, these are your guides. I've given you 14. These are your candles. These are your lights of guidance. Understand them, replicate them, try to be like them as close as you can. That's why we commemorate these people, because on the spiritual journey we need guides, number one. Number two, is it possible for someone to get to a higher spiritual station from the perspective of Islam? Because there are people who say that this mysticism is not acceptable, not right, and there's others who say, hold on a second. If we read the Quran al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid, you'll find there are times where Allah says that an angel spoke to Maryam, the mother of Jesus. Maryam's not a prophet. How can an angel speak to Maryam? That means that some non-prophets even had a higher spiritual status that an angel could speak to them. Or when Allah inspired the mother of Musa, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ أَنْ أَرْضِعِي, and we inspired the mother of Musa to release the child in the river. Allah is inspiring someone directly who's not a prophet. That means this person's at a higher realm. Or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the story of Sulaiman in the Quran, that Sulaiman says, who's going to bring me the throne of Bilqis, the queen of Sheba? And at that point in time, the statement's made that the one who has وَمَنْ عِنْدَهُ عِلْمًا مِنَ الْكِتَابِ, that one is the one who's going to bring it. The one who has some knowledge from the book, he'll bring it. Meaning, knowledge, spirituality, these are things that can elevate a person, and they can get a closer spiritual proximity to Allah, even though they're not prophets or imams. So that means this journey is worth striving for. This journey is worth attempting for. And number 3, they say irfan and spirituality and mysticism, in the truest sense in Islam, it's a different form of knowledge. You see, if I'm studying accounting, or if I'm studying mathematics, or if I'm studying economics, or I'm studying computer science, or if I'm studying medicine, I can go and study that at university, and then I can give an exam and either pass the exam or not pass the exam or whatever. But when it comes to irfan, the spiritual experience of the divine, the ulama say, it's not like those exams that you can just memorize something, write a paper, answer it. It's an experience. Much like if you ask someone who has not had a child, what is it like to be a father? What is it like to be a mother? And you try to explain it to them as much as possible. If you're a father or mother or a parent, you try to explain to them, but until and unless the person actually experiences it is different. Or you ask someone, what is love? Until they've truly experienced it, you can't explain it to them fully. Or someone who's never experienced pain in their life, their whole body is numb medically, and you tell them, what is pain? It's something that needs to be experienced. And that is something that is why it's so difficult to articulate. That's why the mystics try to give this example. I'm giving this to help you explain why we follow these guides of the Ahlul Bayt, to get on a closer trajectory. So when people say today, is our goal the Imams or Ahlul Bayt or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no doubt that the line of Imam Hussein in Dua Arafah makes it clear. What has he gained who has lost you, and what has he lost who has gained you? Ya Allah, our goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to think that we can get solely to that higher upper echelon without a guide is much like the one who starts to try to become a world-class researcher and scientist in academia without a guide or a professor or a mentor or someone of that nature. We don't oftentimes have that much time in our lifetime to be able to cover that, number 1. Number 2, it's for this reason that we are trying to commemorate these people, because they give us a fast track and guidance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. At the second level, this Imam is an Imam who's taking on his position. Now, guide, Al-Hadi is his title, as well as Naqi is his title. The one who's named the guide is that individual who is Imam al-Hadi, but a guide is something that is throughout the Quran. The prophets are guides. Khidr is a guide. There are numerous guides that are being told throughout. Some have a higher caliber, some have a lower caliber. Even when I told you the story of Musa alayhi salam in past lectures, that Allah used different people to guide Musa in order to help him get out of difficult circumstances, did he not? So Allah has used this guide. The question you and I need to ask is, who's our guide? Allah is saying, these are my deputies that I've made on earth to be a guide for you. Now, if you want to pick another guide here and there, Allah says himself that everyone will be raised with their Imam. Now, who's going to be your Imam you pick? Allah is saying, I've lined out who it's going to be for you. But at that same time, this is one lesson that we learn from the title of the Imam. The other is Naqi. What does Naqi mean? Naqi means purity. Now somebody may say, hold on a second, I thought Tahir means purity. By the way, one of the discussions that comes up in food with respect to the Quran is the Quran says Tahir food, for example. So just because something may be, I don't want to open Pandora's box here, but Tahir is also a point to consider as well. That is the food pure? And it's something that's a deeper discussion, and this is where the ethics may come into the matter. I say this because, in our world today, we see free-range eggs, and we see other types of produce or commodities which are fair trade, like coffee and other things. And you may find that Islam was highlighting this or pointing to this much before on the idea that don't just say it's just halal, but is it tahir and pure? Physically, and zahiri and batini.
In our world today, we see free-range eggs, and we see other types of produce or commodities which are fair trade, like coffee and other things. And you may find that Islam was highlighting this or pointing to this much before on the idea that don't just say it's just halal, but is it tahir and pure? Physically,
in terms
and
of
zahiri and batini. In our world today, we see free-range eggs, and we see other types of produce or commodities which are fair trade. Like coffee and other things. And you may find that Islam will highlight
and he's also very young. And I'll give you this example. I'll give you my personal example. I've done the post with some of our youth in the community, which is very, very good. And sometimes you're playing on the sports pitch, you're playing soccer, fantastic sport. Nothing brings people together like sports. In fact, I was reading a study that in tournament years in Europe, the suicide rate goes down, and it lasts till the end of the year, not just the end of the tournament. That people, because of the level of camaraderie and bonding that they have through sports, they actually have a sense of meaning and pride in life. So, but what was I saying? Why was I saying this? It's a small example, but just to give you a glimpse of what it is. So I'll be on the picture with some of these young chaps who are 16, less, 13, 14, 15, and they'll be running circles around you, and they'll be smiling, and you're huffing and puffing, trying to keep up with them. And they're defeating you in every aspect of the equation. Why? Because maybe they have more practice, they started earlier, they're more fit, they've got a lot of other things that are going in their favor. Now, when it comes to this is knowledge that has been passed down from father to son, from father to son, from family to family, from well before. Remember, it doesn't just start with Rasulullah. Rasulullah is coming from the line of Ibrahim, and from Ibrahim all the way back. So this knowledge is being passed in the family divinely, number one. Number two, they are taught from a young age spiritual development. So if an individual has the answers, it doesn't matter if they're 8 or 9 or 10, they have the answers. The problem is we are judging them by how we see the world. Because we grow up in a world and we get into a world where people at 2 and 3 are doing not much. By the way, if you know the maturity of human psychology as well as the human body, I've explained to you these numbers shift. If I told you, for example, puberty was happening faster during COVID, the stress and things of this nature was accelerating that process. When people didn't live beyond 40 or 50 years of age, there was a time in America, women did not live beyond 40. When it was discovered how many women die in certain illnesses, in certain birth giving, in certain things, and certain things were found. As an example, many women used to die in pregnancy and childbirth in particular. It wasn't until a physician realized that if doctors just wash their hands between delivering children, they can save a lot of lives, that many women's lives were saved. Otherwise, they died. And so what I'm saying is, when this happened, that's why that framework, people grew up much earlier. So it wasn't uncommon for someone at 14, 15, 16 to be an adult. Forget that. Some of your parents and grandparents were adults at 13, 14, 15. But look at that time, it was an era where things of that nature were there. So when the Imam came to this mantle, the people wanted to test him. So who wanted to test him? Next level. Mutawakkil al-Abbasi. Mutawakkil al-Abbasi is one of those zalimin tyrants that are, words are limited in terms of trying to describe how bad the guy was. He's tried to destroy Karbala numerous times and many other things. Anyways, he comes forward and he says to the Imam, at a young age, he looks at Imam Hadi and he says, in a gathering, we are superior to you. And all the people get silent, like, what did you just say? So we are superior to you, Yabna Rasulullah, or they would further say, Yabna Radha. After Imam Radha, they would call the progeny of Imam Radha, Yabna Radha. He said, we are superior to you. Why? Then he gives a dalil. He says, because we have the chair and you don't have the chair. Meaning we have the seat of power, we have the throne. And so everyone became silent. They said, seems like a good point, seems like a good dalil. The Imam at a young age looks back at him, he says, if you say this, then Allah sent 124,000 prophets. How many of them had the chair? But a few. Dawood, Sulaiman. Other than that, the vast majority of the prophets did not have a chair of power. So do not think because you have the chair of power, you are validated in Allah's eyes. No. And remember one thing, the Imam looks back at me and says, look, you may rule over the people, zahiri, apparently, but remember, people have our love in their hearts, so we rule over their hearts. That's something you can never have. At that young age, for the Imam to come forward and say this showed that this person was on a different trajectory. He was on a different plane compared to the rulers of the time, number one. Number two, when it came to this, there's a moment in time we're told that this Imam is having a conversation and he would help the Shias in the most difficult times. By the way, this Imam told us a lesson too, as a gift for tonight. The Imam, in one moment in time, he tells one of his companions, he says, here's some money. I want you to take this money, use the money in order to go to Karbala. And when you go to Karbala, do dua there. In particular, do dua for me, on my behalf. So the man, he was a Shia, so he took the money and he did as the Imam said, but he was going to depart the next day. The Imam said, come, I'll meet with me tomorrow morning and then depart from there. So he comes, meets the Imam, and now he hasn't asked this question, but he's thinking it the whole time, that if this is the Imam, why doesn't he just ask the dua right there? Why does he need to have me go to Karbala and ask in Karbala? So he was thinking this. The Imam looks at him. He says, you're thinking, you have a question, do you not? He said, yes, Ibn Rasulullah, I do. He said, let me ask you a question. The Imam's beginning to answer him. He says, let me ask you a question. What is more afdal, Rasulullah or Hajr al-Aswad? He said, Ibn Rasulullah, of course it's Rasulullah. Hajr al-Aswad is a black stone. Sure, it has a high position, but the Rasulullah is وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Allah says that He created, and He's like the Rahmah on the Alameen, as well as He's the one who's the mercy upon everyone. Why? Definitely Rasulullah. He says, then why is it that whenever Rasulullah needed to do a dua, a big dua, he would circumambulate around the Kaaba, he would do tawaf of the Kaaba, kiss Hajr al-Aswad, and then ask his dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why? He said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, I don't know why. He says, the reason is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made certain places a place where your dua will be expedited. Your dua will be fast-tracked, where your dua will be accepted sooner. One of these places is the Kaaba, by the Hajr al-Aswad. Another is Karbala. The Imam was telling at that time that there are ways for you to solve your problems. That's why I'm saying the second layer, if we think about why we tell our next generation to pray, first of all, the prayer is your gateway to your superpower, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But number two, that's not your only tool in your toolkit. Then one may say, Allah is too abstract, I can't get to Allah. Then Allah gave you 14 representatives. And if you have a big dua, a big haja, you can use their tawassul as your guide to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But remember, the goal is always Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The people who went to a high spiritual station, they were always pointing further to Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But believe me, if you tap into the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through these personalities, you will go to a different plane. The miracles are timeless and endless. And again, this is something of experience. We live in what's called the empirical world. The empirical world is that world where I go into the lab and I study and I try to experimentally, physically show this is what it is. And that is very important and has its place. But in the realm of the spirit and in spirituality, some things are experiential. And until we don't realize that, we will continuously be confused. So this was another example. Where else did the Imam help? A man by the name of Yunus al-Naqash. Yunus al-Naqash was a person who was a scribe or a one who used to do calligraphy, and he would etch these into stones and in marbles and in precious jewels. Mutawakkil calls him, and the ruler calls him, he says, look, here's this very expensive ruby that I have. I want you to inscribe on this some words. He says, take it, go back. But obviously, make sure nothing happens. This is priceless. It's like, I went to the British Museum in London, and mashallah, there are all these stolen artifacts, like Koh-i-Noor diamonds and all of these things from all over the world, from Egypt and India and all of these places. So he says, look, here's my biggest prized possession and jewel. Here, take this and write something on it. Okay. So he goes home. When he goes home, he's starting to scribe and write down all of these things. He's trying to make the design, the pattern, and he's about to get started. When he leaves this, and at some point in time, he leaves his room where he's doing his work. Now, having children myself, and I'm sure many of you know this, sometimes you never fathom how your kids will get to your things. So the same thing happened to Yunus and Naqash. His kids got a hold of this ruby and they started playing with him when he had just stepped away. By the time he came back to a scene which for him was a scene of horror, that the ruby had been split in two. Now Yunus was a Shia, follower of the Ahlul Bayt. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, this is my only chance. I can only go to the Imam of the time. He's the only one who can help me. Otherwise it's my head. He went there, he went to the Imam. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, Imam al-Hadi, Imam al-Naqi, Imam, can you please help me? I'm in a dire situation. Imam says, what's the matter? Of course the Imam knew, but again, if the Imam said everything that he knew, there would be no dialogue and we wouldn't be able to benefit years on. So he said, what's the issue? He said, I was given the largest jewel that this ruler has in order to write something and scribe it on it as a jeweler, as an artist, as an artisan. And I brought it home and I stepped away from it for a moment, and by that time my children had begun to play with it and they split it in two by the time I came back. Imam says, don't worry. And he says, really? He said, yes. He said, I want you to go tomorrow, and when you go tomorrow to the ruler, before you leave the house, pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in particular, I'm saying this on Tuesday night after the dua that we just recited. He says, give Allah the tawassul of us, the Ahlul Bayt, sincerely. Why tawassul? He said, very well. He said, I did as the Imam said. I made the preparations, and I left that day in the morning, and I prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the tawassul of the Ahlul Bayt. What is tawassul? Tawassul is this notion that I can go to someone and ask someone who do dua for me. If I have an exam, no Muslim denies that I can go to another person and say, please pray for me, I have an exam coming up. So the only issue is, can you ask someone who is dead? People say, someone who's deceased, can you ask them to pray? Now, first of all, in our view, they aren't deceased the way you think they're deceased, number one. Number two, their spiritual status is much higher. If I want someone to do dua for me, do I just take someone off the side of the road, or do I find someone who has the spiritual closeness to Allah? If I want a meeting with the President of the United States, do I just go find someone at a convenience store, or do I go and find someone who has connections to the President of the United States? It's a simple question. In any event, he made the dua and he did the tawassul sincerely from his heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Ahlul Bayt. And he went on his way. When he entered into the court of the ruler, and he entered in front of the ruler because the ruler had summoned him. And the Imam told him, he will summon you. So he went and he was summoned. And imagine, he's in a state of fear. At that point in time, the ruler says, look, that ruby that I had given you, that stone, that gem that I give you, and I told you to write something on it, did you do it? And before Yunus and Naqash can open his mouth, he says, I hope you didn't, I hope you didn't. Because let me explain, the ruler's telling me. Let me explain. He said, what happened? He said, last night, I told my wives, he says, I told my wives about this incident, and they had a fuss between them, and now they both want a piece of that jewel. Subhanallah, the Zalimeen are even afraid of their wives, not afraid of anyone else. So he says, look, here's this thing that's going on. I have this, I want you to do the following for me. So what? So I want you to split this in half, and then write on this and inscribe on it. Perhaps Yunus and Naqash, his heart, perhaps it was in his stomach, it went back to its place, and perhaps he was able to breathe again because the dua had been accepted. He came back. When he came back, he went straight to the Imam. He said, Yabna Rasulullah. He was smiling as the Imam could tell that his dua had been accepted. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, I'm not surprised at the du'as, but can they be accepted in this way also? He said, the Imam gives him an answer. If you are asked sincerely to Allah through our tawassul, yes, they can be answered in this way as well. I'll give you a side note, which I wish I had time, I won't trouble you too much. Believe me, people who had no belief in Islam or the Ahlul Bayt, they have done such du'as, and Allah has granted it out of the most impossible realms. And they've begun to believe through the experiences that they have had over time. Try to tap into that potential, and you will go very far, inshallah. Further than this, final thing, Ibn Sikit. Now, Mutawakkil wanted to embarrass the Imam on numerous occasions. When he wanted to embarrass the Imam to try to say that he's a kid, what does he know? One of the instances, he invited the tutor of the time, of his own students, his own children, I should say, Ibn Sikit. Now, as you know, royalty and very wealthy people throughout history, their kids often didn't go to public school or any of that wasn't even available as an option many times. They had private tutors who came and would teach them. So So Ibn Sakit was the tutor and the most educated person of the time. And so Mutawakkil sets up a dialogue and a debate between Ibn Sakit and Imam al-Hadi. Now Ibn Sakit he's being acquainted with the Imam. And so they're sitting, and at that point in time, the Imam is young, and Ibn Sakit is this knowledgeable person of the time. And he says, shall I ask you some questions, young man? He says, very well, you're welcome to. The Imam says, you're welcome to ask me the questions. He says, why is it, first question, why is it that Allah sent different miracles for different times? Why did sometimes Allah send a miracle of, for example, in the time of Musa, it was magic. In the time of Isa, it was medicine. Or at the time of Rasulullah, it's the Quran. Why? And so he says, the miracles of Allah changed based on zaman and makan. Based on the time and space, they changed. So he said, number one, the miracle during the time of Musa was magic. So Allah gave him this yad-e bayza, and Allah gave him the light that illuminated from his palm, and Allah gave him the staff so that it could overcome the miracle, the magic of the time, so people knew. That's why in the Quran it says, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سُجَّدًا. All the magicians fell into prostration because they knew this was something that was afdal, number one. Number two, during the time of the likes of Nabi Isa alayhi salam, medicine was very advanced. And when medicine was very advanced, they could do a lot of things, but they couldn't bring the dead back to life. So Allah gave Isa the ability, Jesus the ability to bring the dead back to life, to prove that he is doing this bi'idhnillah. Through the will of Allah, he's bringing the dead back to life. And they knew, the physicians of the time knew that we can do a lot of things, but we can't do that. Now the third, he says, during the time of Rasulullah, the miracle was the Quran. Now, as an explanation, if you want to truly understand the miracle of the Quran, you have to understand it in the Arabic language. You can get some of the meaning of the Quran, no doubt, but the miracle linguistically is in the Arabic. I'll give you an example. Sha'sha was a great poet of the time. Sha'sha was a poet who would not leave his house in Ayyam Jahiliyyah. When a few lines of the Quran were put on the Kaaba next to Saba Mu'allaqat, this Sha'sha would not speak all year. You know, the same way Miranis, they say Miranis would not speak to commoners because the language of their tongue would get on his tongue and he didn't want that to affect his poetry. The same thing, this was known from poets from a long time. So Sha'sha would never speak to anybody. He would only come out of his house once a year. He was the greatest poet of the time in order to put his work on the Saba Mu'allaqat or read what's there and go back. And he wouldn't say anything, he would just write. He comes out and he looks at the Quran. That one day of the year when the festival happens, he goes to the Kaaba and he begins to read all their things there. And then he reads some verses. And he exclaims, Ma hadha kalam al-bashar. These are not the words of a human. Referring to the verse of the Quran. That anyone could have wrote this, but a human couldn't. But why? I'll give you one example. وَرَبِّكَ فَكَبِّرْ رَبِّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. The Quran talks about this. Now, when the Quran gives us ayah, وَرَبِّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, many people don't understand, look, why did Allah make sure Rasulullah was not lettered? Lettered meaning no one taught him, number one. And why was number two, the Quran orally transcribed? Meaning, when Rasulullah said it, it was memorized by people automatically. And once Rasulullah said it, it's no taking it back. So people memorized it and they distributed far and wide. Do you know, if you look at Rabbika Fakabbir in the Quran, it's a palindrome, the ayah. You know what a palindrome is? The word is spelt the same way front and back. This was not something that you would expect linguistically amongst somebody who is unlettered in an oral tradition. But when you read the Arabic, you are baffled that how did someone do this? That have a word that's going front and back, a line, a verse that's going front and back. Maybe a word you can have a palindrome, but to have a whole line as a palindrome is not something that's easy to do and something that could happen coincidentally. And there's many other examples of this, but I invite you to look at that. So anyways, when he said this, then Ibn Sakit asked a big question which gives a favor to you and I, and that was this. He says, then what's the hujjah of today? If those were the hujjah of their time, what's the hujjah of today? Yeah, he said the hujjah of today is aql, reason. That is, in our world, in our society, the way we understand the Quran may be different than the ones who before. I'll give you one example. The Italian doctor, Maurice Bucay, or however the pronunciation is, different ways of pronouncing it, he became a Muslim. From Christian, he became a Muslim simply, what you can read his book on science and the Quran, the Bible, Quran and science, and he talks about what the Quran highlighted from a scientific perspective, and I'm not validating the Quran because of science. That has its own philosophical problems. What I'm saying is, this individual, who was not uneducated, said that for me, what I'm seeing in the Quran scientifically is enough for me to become a Muslim, because that could not have been known at that time. And there's many other jewels like this that you and I should consider when we seriously study the Quran. This same Ibn Sakit, now concluding, this same Ibn Sakit, later on, someone of knowledge. Why have knowledge? Because when you have knowledge, you should become a seeker of truth. Although Ibn Sakit was on the payroll of Mutawakkil and he was tutoring his kids, later on, through this dialogue, he developed the ma'arif of the Imam. To the point that Mutawakkil, once in a state of drunkenness, he asked Ibn Sakit, the tutor of his children, he says, tell me, who are afdal, who are greater, my children or Hassan and Hussein? Ibn Sakit couldn't take it. He said, you're asking me about your kids or Hassan and Hussein, the grandchildren of Rasulullah, the children of Ali al-Murtaza? He says, let me tell you that your children don't even compare to Qambar, the servant of Ali ibn Abi Talib. At that point in time, in a rage, because he had no intellectual answer, in a rage, he says, cut out his tongue. They cut out the tongue of Ibn Sakit. But remember, if it was Ibn Sakit, or it was Maysam at-Tammar, or it was anyone else in that era and time, remember, Rushayd al-Hajari, thousands of people, in the love of Amir al-Mu'min, they've given their life. But the poet says, Faraze dar se misam bayan dete hain, aur rahega zikr Ali hum zuban dete hain. That no matter what happens, from the height, Maysam is saying that the zikr of Ali ibn Abi Talib will remain. Because remember, show us greater role models, I'm ready to follow them. But the world has not seen greater role models than Rasulullah, than Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the holy progeny. Ajrukum Allah. 2 moments of musibah. We're told that when it comes to this, the 11th Imam is seeing that his father is in this state where the blood in the poison is mixing. The narrations say that a few Imams got the worst of the worst poisons. The one Imam who got the first of the 4 Imams who got the worst poisons was Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. He got one of the worst poisons, one of the strongest, most potent poisons, that the liver of Imam al-Hassan al-Mujtaba began to come out. Who was the second? They say Imam al-Radha. They had taken one of the most potent poisons and they had given it to Imam al-Radha, and this began to impact the body of Imam al-Radha. Who else? They say the last 2 Imams who got one of the most potent, strongest, worst of poisons was Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari. They say that when Imam al-Hadi, the poison seeped into his blood and his holy body, his holy spirit departed from his body. At that point in time, the rulers, they wanted to play politics and they wanted to have a public funeral. Imam al-Askari, the 11th Imam, he says that I will first have the namaz-e-janazah of my father here in the home. The close companions, we will do it together. Then he can have his spectacle if he wants. They did all of this. They made the arrangements. Imam al-Hadi was buried. Ajrukum Allah. Magar azadaro do jumle. Hazaro salam Imam Hassan Askari par. और इमाम ज़माना को आप ताज़ियत पेश कीजिए और सलाम हो इमाम हादी पर. आपको गुस्ल भी मिला, कफन भी मिला. जी जहर बहुत शदीद था, बहुत सख्त था, मगर उसके दिल से पूछिए जो करबला में सैयद साजिदीन जिसे कहते हैं कि बाबा को 3 दिन तक गुस्ल कफन न मिला. और जब भी कोई चाहता है कि कब्र हुसैन पे जाए, कोई ताजियाना मारता है, कोई नेजा मारता है, 3 दिन तक गुस्ल इमाम का खून रहा और कफन दश्त करबला रहा. अला लानतुल्लाहि अलल कौम ज़ालिमीन व सयअलमुल.
Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Azizo kya ग़ज़ब आया नकी जग से उठा अफ़सोस शहंशाह है दो आलम वो उठा जग से हजार अफसोस अजीजो क्या गजब आया नकी जग से उठा अफसोस नबी मरकद में रोते हैं अली जन्नत से आए हैं नबी मरकद में रोते हैं अली जन्नत से आए हैं पुले सरफा तेमा पोते पुरोने प्याने आई है अजीजो क्या गजब आया नकी जग से उठा अफसोस यूं रो रो अस करी लाशे पिदर पे कहते हैं हर बार यूं रो रो अस करी लाशे पिदर पे कहते हैं हर बार हुआ बिन बा काफ सो करूं क्या मैं जिगर अफगार अजीजो क्या अजब आया नकी जग से उठा अफसोस अजीजो क्या गजब आया नकी जग से उठा अफसोस मेरा बाबा मेरा बाबा एक ऐसी नींद में सोए मेरा बाबा मेरा बाबा ये कैसी नींद में सोए मैं रोता हूँ खराया पे तसल्ली ये दे दीजिए अजीजो क्या गजब आया नकी जग से उठा अफसोस अजीजो क्या गजब आया नकी जग से उठा अफसोस शहंशाह है दो आलम वो उठा जग से हजार अफसोस मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سورة المباركة الفاتحة Ahsan. As I said earlier, tonight, our deepest condolences from behalf of the whole community to all of us. We're commemorating the shahadat of our 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Naqi al-Hadi. May Allah give us that opportunity to visit our Imam and do the ziyarah, inshallah. We have, let's remember those that are no longer amongst us, those that are in need, those that Allah can help with the Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Just another quick reminder of the Shia Muslim Council program, Imam Ali Inspires. on February 12th, inshallah. The tickets are still available. In fact, tomorrow is the last day for the discounted pricing on the tickets. So if you have yet to purchase yours, please do take a look at them and get your set of tickets, inshallah. The program is on February 12th, and more information is available on the Shia Muslim Council website. This Thursday is the first Thursday of the month of Rajab. It is highly recommended to recite the Amal of Laylatul Ghaib. We'll inshallah send out information tomorrow on how to follow along at your own pace and to complete the Amal for that night, inshallah. I would like to end the program with ziyarah. I'll ask Uncle Murtaza if you can please recite the ziyarah for us, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولى ابن مولى السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبو الحسن الرضا علي بن موسى الرضا وشفينا وشفيع والدي في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان الأمان 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 سلامك يا خليفة الرحمن سلامك يا كعبة الإيمان سلامك يا إمام الإنس والجان أجل الله فرجك وسهل الله تعالى معرجك وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك حجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك التوأة وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل على
Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Ahsan. Thank you, everybody. Inshallah. Remember all of us in your Amal this Thursday, inshallah.